Welcome to tonight's program on the National Popular Vote Compact. Our sponsors are Clean Elections Minnesota and the League of Women Voters of Minnesota. Clean Elections Minnesota is a nonprofit, non-partisan organization that provides educational programming and advocates for voting rights and more complete campaign finance disclosure. The Minnesota League of Women Voters encourages informed and active participation in government and increased understanding of major policy issues. It also influences public policy through education and advocacy. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, states signing the National Popular Vote Compact would agree to give their electoral votes to the presidential candidate having the most popular votes nationally, regardless of the vote in their state. It would mean that for the first time, the candidate supported by the most voters would be guaranteed the presidency. Tonight, our guest is Patrick Rosenstiel, a Minnesotan, a nationally recognized figure in public affairs, and senior consultant to the National Popular Vote Compact. He will be interviewed by Lori Sturdevant, who is a retired political reporter and editorial columnist for the Star Tribune and one of our state's top political thinkers. Patrick and Lori?
Well, thank you, Kathleen. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you tonight and to be sponsored by two organizations that I greatly admire. And Patrick, it's great to be with you as well. You and I have known each other for a while here, and it's great to talk about something that I'm really curious about. The National Popular Vote Compact is something I've heard about for a long time, and I've got a bunch of questions for us. I know our listeners will have some too, so please do, listeners, take advantage of that Q&A function on your screen tonight. Patrick, let's start with a critique of the Electoral College, which is something I've long thought doesn't serve us very well in this country. What's wrong with choosing a president with the Electoral College as we do today?
Well, that's a question that's interesting, right? Because I'm not sure how broken I think the Electoral College is. The way that we're using it, I think, is fundamentally broken, right? So I think one of the misconceptions around the Electoral College is that this current system we have as required under the Electoral College. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution gives the states the power to award electors. 48 states now do it by a winner-take-all law. And it's that winner-take-all system that I got a significant beef with, and for multiple reasons. Like you said, you and I have known each other for a long time. I sort of cut my teeth in American politics. I've been around American presidents and the campaigns that they run. And I guess my principal critique of the current system is that 3 out of 4 voters in 3 out of 4 states are absolutely ignored in the presidential campaigns because of, the state-based winner-take-all system where battleground state voters have all of the power, and then the spectator states or the flyover states have none of the political power with the president. So, that's my principal critique. A national popular vote for president, which is what my focus is having a national popular vote for president, will guarantee the presidency to the candidate who wins the most popular votes. But as important, it will ensure that every voter in every state is politically relevant in every presidential election. And I think it's very important that occur, just given the instability that the current system delivers. I mean, there are just too many voters who feel like they're left on the sidelines because they are. And, we've gotten to a place where these closely divided battleground states aren't even being decided by voters in the battleground states. They're being chosen by courts, right? So let's extend the principle of one person, one vote to presidential elections. I can't think of a single redeeming quality to the current system, which is why I'm a proponent of reform.
It's happened twice in our lifetimes that someone who won the popular vote lost the presidency. That happened most recently, of course, in 2016. But as I did a little digging around the history of the Electoral College, I was a little surprised to learn that it happened 3 times previous to our lifetimes, 5 times in the total of 50-some presidential elections, that the popular vote winner was not chosen as president. It's not a very good democratic record there, is it, Patrick?
Oh, I agree. And I think opponents of reform, they're probably scared of a couple of things, either the voters or their ideas. And I'm not afraid of either of them, but they say that it doesn't happen very often. Well, if my plane takes off from Minneapolis and I'm going to Florida and 5 out of 58 times it lands in Chicago, that's beyond inconvenient, right? We're not even talking about electing the leader of the free world, the president of the United States, the leader of our country that puts people in harm's way, leads political agendas for the country. So, in the end, the reason I'm a full-throated proponent for the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is because I believe we need to elect the president by popular vote, that Republicans, Democrats, and independents can agree that one person, one vote is a foundational principle of American democracy. And I think the future of our republic relies on, frankly, reforming the way we elect the president of the United States, because current system, all it gives you is tribalism and partisanship, right? At the end of the day, we shouldn't be thinking about red America and blue America. We should be thinking about, the United States of America and who has the best message of resonance with the most American voters. And there's only one plan to deliver that, which is the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So,
well, let's go more deeply into this National Popular Vote Compact and explain how it would work. It is step by step. A lot of us are still in primary school where this idea is concerned. How would this work?
Yeah, so National Popular Vote is an agreement amongst the states. They're called interstate compacts, and they're older than the country, right? So for example, the Articles of Confederation were an interstate compact, and there's still interstate compacts that exist from back then. What compacts are is agreements amongst the states. Powerball is an interstate compact. The Great Lakes Compact, how we manage that resource, that's an agreement amongst the states. What the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says is that when states with 270 or more electoral votes, which is a majority of the 538 electors, right, under Article 2, Section 1, that guarantees the presidency. When states with 270 or more electoral votes have the compact in place, those states are agreeing to award their electors in block to the National Popular Vote winner. And that's defined as the candidate who gets the most popular votes in all 50 states and the District of Columbia. So Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution allows states to form agreements amongst themselves called interstate compacts. Article 2, Section 1 leaves it to the legislature to determine how they're going to award electors. The National Popular Vote Interstate Compact says that when states with 270 or more electoral votes say we're going to have a national popular vote for president, we have a national popular vote for president. And again, the payoff is that it doesn't matter if you live in Duluth, Minnesota, or any city, Florida. You know what I mean? You're going to be politically relevant in the presidential election, and the candidate with the most votes is going to be guaranteed the presidency, which by far and away most Americans want, right? It's not a controversial idea. It's a very popular idea. And there's one way to get it, which is our compact.
I heard you just now citing the constitutional foundation for this idea, and it does sound like it's got a real plausible bedrock with the Constitution, but has this been tested in any way? Do we know for sure this is constitutional?
Well, yeah, I think it's been tested. I mean, the power of the state to award electors is plenary power of the state. I don't think there's any more settled part of case law around states being able to award their electors, right? Interstate compacts are a settled matter of case law. States can form agreements amongst themselves. We know that it's sound constitutionally because the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact has been vetted through almost every legislative chamber in every state in America. It's passed in 15 states in the District of Columbia, fully vetted by constitutional lawyers and counsel of all political parties, right? So the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact isn't a theory, right? We have 15 states in the District of Columbia that's passed our bill. We currently have states with 195 electoral votes where we are their law. They're waiting for states with 75 more electoral votes to join them, and we will have a national popular vote for president. So, look, I'm not going to say there aren't going to be lawsuits because this is America, but if we wait to pass any law because there might be a lawsuit, right, we'll never fix any problems. And in the end, everything we're talking about settled case law around the awarding of electors and the state power to do that, and interstate compacts and the state's ability to join them. So when we get to 270 electoral votes, we're going to have a national popular vote for president. And I would say anybody who wants a national popular vote for president that's listening in today, there's one way to do it, which is call your legislator here in Minnesota and tell them to join, because that'd be 10 more.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, because I did want to talk about where this all stands in Minnesota. I was actually surprised to learn that we've had consideration of this idea in the Minnesota legislature pretty much every session since 2009. It's come even fairly close to passing at one point, but still has not. What's the situation in Minnesota?
Yeah, I mean, we got a long history here, right? And we have a legacy of bipartisan support. And that's true of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact everywhere. I think one of the biggest myths is that the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is a Republican or Democrat idea. It's neither one of those things. That you happen to be talking to a full-throated proponent of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact who's been a lifelong member of the Republican Party and the conservative movement, right? Working arm in arm right now with Chairman Freiberg and others over at the Capitol, right, who's a DFLer, because we both believe there's a better way to elect the president. But, there's always been a legacy of bipartisan support here. I remember when Speaker Thiessen was the Speaker of the House and Kurt Zellers was the minority leader, right? Both of them were sponsors of the National Popular Vote Bill. It was introduced the first time by Steve Simon, had significant bipartisan support in both chambers in 2009 and 2011. Sometimes you run into chairmen with gavels who don't like ideas, and you got to manage around those things. 2019, the National Popular Vote Bill was a part of an omnibus package that passed the House. So Minnesota is one of those states. We have 9 states where we've passed one chamber or another with 88 electoral votes. The Minnesota House, Oklahoma Senate, Arizona House, right? States like that. And so where we're at in Minnesota is we got our shoulder to the wheel until our 10 electoral votes are in the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. We're at the Capitol right now every day building bipartisan support for the bill. I don't make any predictions on any given year, but I will tell you that if you are a proponent of the National Popular Vote for president, you should really get behind the compact, let your legislator know, because we believe we're right for success here. The only guarantee I make to my fellow Minnesotans is I'm not going to quit till we're in the compact and the compact is triggering and affecting our presidential elections, because to not achieve that is way too dangerous for the future of our democracy.
Okay, so rehearse those numbers for us again. We've now had enough states to secure, what did you say, 190 electoral votes?
Yeah, we have 195 electoral votes right now. A bunch of some big states, some small states, medium-sized states. So 195 electoral votes. We've passed one chamber or the other, either the House or the Senate or both, in 9 additional states with 88 electoral votes.
So more than enough.
More than the 75 required for us to have a national popular vote for president. So if I, sometimes sound like I'm pressing, I am. I am pressing. Like, I think it's really important that everybody who says they support a national popular vote for president understand that it's not that far away. If you just make it known, don't complicate things, and support the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, because it is how we're going to have a national popular vote for president. And I'll tell you what, when I started this project in 2007, right, it was like, this is going to be neat if this happens, right? Now it's a matter of when, because the current system is crushing under its own weight. There are too many American voters left behind. There's too much instability in the political system because of presidential elections. And there's too many voters. I don't talk to voters of either party who are satisfied with the current system. It is threatening the very fabric of our democracy, and we need to fix it. And so I know that legislatures will have the courage to do that. Will have the will to do that if they hear from their constituents.
Well, you mentioned a moment ago the bipartisan history of this support in Minnesota, but you also know that since you started in 2007, our Minnesota legislature has, just like the rest of the country, become more polarized in a partisan way. I spoke with a longtime Republican recently who, similar pedigree to your own, who said, this is just going to help the Democrats. And so the Republicans can't be for this. And it is the case that the times in our lifetime when a national popular vote winner did not become president, that was Al Gore and Hillary Clinton, two Democrats. What about the partisan resistance or partisanship around this issue, Patrick?
Okay, I want to make sure you know I'm not calling you lazy, but I think that thinking is lazy. Okay, so that or shows a complete misunderstanding of how the presidential system works. So I guess you know me, Lori, you know that I'm not interested in election reforms that make it harder for people who share my ideas to win politically unless the voters don't share my ideas. You know, I'm really comfortable with that equation. But the idea that Hillary Clinton or Al Gore would have been president if we had a national popular vote for president in place, I think that's pretty lazy thinking and shows an absolute fundamental misunderstanding of the very real problems with the current system. So for example, in 2000, that was when I was a younger man and had, I don't know, the energy for American politics and campaigns, right? I was around that election very closely. I actually helped the Bush administration with their public policy agenda, you know, when they were elected president. In 2000, the Republican candidate for president, my candidate, George Bush, spent more money in the battleground state of Florida than 42 other states combined to win it by 527 popular votes, right? Now, under a national, the entire American South was ignored. The entire Mountain West was ignored. Blue states like California were ignored. So there was a depressed turnout in California, particularly among Republican voters. Now, here's what I can't predict, and I won't tell you. I don't know if Al Gore or George Bush would have won that campaign if it was the national popular vote election. I do know that it would have been run very differently. And frankly, if the future of my political movement, meaning the Republican conservative movement in America, can't figure out a way to fight for the hearts and minds of every American voter, contest every inch of turf in this country, we don't deserve to be winning elections. Now, again, I think there's a very real reason to be afraid of the national popular vote interstate compact. If you're afraid of your ideas and if you're afraid of the voters, you're talking to a conservative Republican who isn't afraid of either of those things. All I want is for a Republican in Connecticut to matter as much as a Democrat in Oklahoma, right? And if we got to reinvigorate the grassroots politics on all sides of the political aisle, and I'm not just talking about Republicans and Democrats, I'm talking about libertarians and Green Party. If we want to do that, if we're interested in increasing participation in the American democratic process, the single most important reform anybody can get behind is a national popular vote for president. And the only singular way to get that done is through our plan at nationalpopularvote.com. So whoever the Republican operative is, if we know each other, give me a call. I'll explain to you what my experience is and why we don't need to be afraid of a national popular vote for president.
Well, let me tell you, that same person had one other objection that I want you to address, if you would. And
Sure.
that is that if we had national popular vote, small states, small population states like North and South Dakota, where this fellow was from, that they would be left in the dust, wouldn't matter at all, and that that would be the candidates would concentrate on would be the big states on the coast. Please respond to that.
So first of all, with all due respect, so Scott Hennon, who's a buddy of mine, right? He does the radio show up in Fargo, North Dakota, that reaches into Western Minnesota. He and I had this discussion. North Dakota and South Dakota, when's the last time they had a presidential visit during a presidential campaign? When's the last time they weren't exporters of political economy during a political campaign? When's the last time they were a battleground state? The answer to that question is never. So the smallest states, 6 of them are reliably Republican, 6 of them are reliably Democrat. You know, those small population states, all of them are completely ignored in the system we currently use for electing the president of the United States, right? Because the Republican candidate is either comfortably ahead or hopelessly behind or vice versa. So the only way I know how to make small state voters relevant in presidential elections is to make sure that every voter in every state is politically relevant in presidential elections. Now, I will tell you 50% of the voters live within 75 miles of the coast. Okay. Now, that includes the Gulf Coast, by the way, which isn't like, I don't know, left-wing territory. You know, there's a lot of conservatives on the coast. Long Island isn't full of liberal Democrats, for example, but only 50% of Americans live within 75 miles of the coast. What does that mean? 50% of Americans don't. Now, when we're running for campaign for governor here in Minnesota, you remember Tim Pawlenty? Anybody? Well, I can't see a show of hands, but we all know that Tim Pawlenty was our governor, right? Did Tim Pawlenty get elected governor because he won Minneapolis, St. Paul, Rochester, Mankato, and Duluth? The urban core major population areas of Minnesota? No, he ran an aggressive campaign for the hearts and minds of every voter he could, no matter where they lived in Minnesota, including the rural areas, because that's what candidates do in the first past the post systems. Did Tim Walz just ignore rural Minnesota to win the gubernatorial election? Of course he didn't. He campaigned vigorously for the hearts and minds of every Minnesota voter. That's what happens in first past the post systems. That's what happens when every voter matters in every election. And that's all we're trying to achieve here. So I think it's short-sighted. I think it's wrong. I think it ignores demography. And I think it ignores the reality of the current system where rural voters and small state voters are definitely ignored.
Well, you're right about that. Patrick, would we be talking about this if it were easier to amend the U.S. Constitution and simply eliminate the Electoral College?
Yeah, I think we would. I mean, the truth is anybody who thinks the national popular vote interstate compact is easier than amending the U.S. Constitution can walk in my shoes for a day. There's nothing easy about this. I think the reason we don't pursue a constitutional amendment, to be honest, is because it's not necessary. Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution leaves it to the legislatures to determine how they're going to award electors. The interstate compact allows us to have a national popular vote. The legislature can move to have a national popular vote for president. And, you know, I'm sort of like a strict constructionist and everybody in the world isn't, right? That's in our world. But I'm saying, like, I don't change a city charter to fill a pothole. The power exists within the city charter to fix the problem. I would say a third of our coalition, are people like me who support a national popular vote for president, but not overly interested in stripping the state of the power, right? Your person who raises the objections on a system that doesn't currently exist, projecting problems on it. You know what I mean? The truth is let's have a national popular vote for president. If in fact, the coasts dominate presidential elections, I think states ought to be able to withdraw from it and go to another system. Now, there are a lot of members of our coalition that support a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College too. But we don't have to do it to have a national popular vote for president. Truth is, we got 195 electoral votes. Why wouldn't we all focus on finding the 75 we need to have a popular vote for president? And that's the one I'm behind. That's what I'm behind.
We're starting to see some interesting questions in the Q&A, and I appreciate that very much, and keep them coming, folks. One that just came in a moment ago, it strikes me as an interesting one. What would, since states can opt in, what would prevent a state from opting out, and maybe opting out in such a way that an election would be suddenly called into question?
Yeah, so the compact is really clear on the withdrawal clause, right? Anybody who asks that question, I would point you to our website a little bit and dig into interstate compacts and what they are and how they work. No state in the history of the Republic has been able to withdraw from an interstate compact without adhering to the terms of the compact, right? So those are contracts between the states that are enforced by the impairments clause of the Constitution, which is extra, constitutional. Okay, so the compact itself stipulates that no candidate can withdraw from the compact within a 6-month period of time, from July 20th of a presidential year until 6 months later, which includes some pretty important things, right? Like the nominating convention, the general election campaign for president, the election day, which is the only day that electors can be elected and selected, right? The safe harbor date, which is required to report the results from the states, the counting of the electoral ballots, and the swearing in of the next president, right? So like if the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact has 270 electoral votes in it on July 20th of a presidential year, it locks in for that presidential election to ensure that the system operates the way everybody is expecting it to operate. Now, there is protection on withdrawal too, right? Let's just say we're at 275 electoral votes and Minnesota decides they want to withdraw, dipping us to 265, right? Well, the truth is if they do that, the compacting states don't start at 0. The compact stipulates that all of the remaining states, they got to find 5 more electoral votes, right? Because it says it triggers anytime there are 270 electoral votes. So the compacting states revert back to their previous statute until such time. And so if one state withdraws, another state can come in and get the compact over 270.
And Patrick, if we would have the kind of mischief where a state would attempt to withdraw, who enforces this sort of thing? Is it enforced by the federal courts?
Oh yeah, federal courts. Well, so state courts, federal courts, the Supreme Court of the United States. And again, like withdrawing from an interstate compact requires, I mean, no state has ever in the history of our country been able to withdraw from a compact without adhering to its terms. So it's enforced by the courts. And you know, the truth is, we don't think a lot of states are going to withdraw from the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Look, Pew had a poll in August. 63% of the American people believe we should eliminate the Electoral College. I'm sure that number's higher if you ask them, do you support or oppose a national popular vote for president, right? That's been polling with over the years at 70%. I don't think, here's what I don't think, having been in, man, I can't even count the number of states. You know, I've been here since 2007. We have 15 in the compact. I can't think of a single person who considers this issue at the level of the legislature or government that is interested in gaming a system. You know what I mean? The people who support the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact do it because they believe we should have the principle of one person, one vote governing presidential elections. So I think this nefarious idea, like I reject the concept that there's this nefarious Oz behind a curtain that's going to be, I don't know, well, hang on a second, my guy's down 6 points, so therefore I'm gonna, you know, that's not how people make these decisions in my opinion. They don't have that kind of foresight, you know, on July 20th.
I can't imagine this kind of resistance, and I'd like you to respond to this, that a state would vote in one way for a presidential candidate, and that candidate would not be the winner of the national popular vote, and the legislature would have to send, under the compact, electors for a candidate that the state's voters did not support in a majority way. And I can imagine then some of those state voters being unhappy and filing a lawsuit or making other kinds of trouble politically for these legislators who are adhering to the compact. When you think about that kind of resistance to this that might arise in the practice of exercising the National Popular Vote Compact, what's the proper response for that concern?
Yeah, I don't know. So a couple of things to keep in mind, right? Like the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, right, says that the electors of the party of the candidate who wins the most popular votes in all 50 states in the District of Columbia are the electors that come from the compacting states. Okay, so it's not, you know, if a Democrat wins the state of Minnesota, right, and loses the national popular vote, it'll be the Republican electors that cast the ballot for Minnesota. And what locks in their loyalty here is we have a faithless elector law, you know, which clearly demonstrates the plenary power of the state to even bind electors, not let alone direct them. I don't think so. So here's the deal. It almost sounds like the question thinks that people are going to be surprised that the candidate who gets the most popular votes in all 50 states are going to get Minnesota's electors. They're not going to be surprised. We're going to have a $1 billion or more presidential campaign where the candidates are vigorously contesting every voter in every state for the first time in my lifetime. I'm going to feel like, oh my God, I'm a Republican. I better go pew to pew, business to business, door to door, peer to peer, make sure my friends are turning out, because now if I get 48% of the vote versus 47, it makes a difference. Okay, so we're all going to be in this contest where we know that where Republicans and Democrats are going to try to win Minnesota by bigger margins, and we're all going to know that the candidate with the most votes in all 50 states is going to be elected president. Now, I can tell you, I know a lot of DFLers, right? Look, I will say selfishly, I'm a Republican trapped behind the blue wall in Minnesota. Like every presidential election I voted in, I could have stayed home and cleaned my gutters because, look, we're the only state that voted for Walter Mondale, right? But I can tell you, like Ken Martin, who's a friend of mine and sort of a supporter of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, when DFLers were the electors from Minnesota and we were swearing in George Bush in 2004, there wasn't this huge electoral college party going on at the DFL because we carried Minnesota. So first of all, voters aren't going to be surprised. Second of all, legislators don't get punished for giving the people what they want, which is a national popular vote for president. Every voter in Minnesota is going to feel valued and feel like they have a voice in directing a 270 electoral vote block. And you know what we're going to get better at is living with results, which is good.
Tell us a little bit more about the states that have passed the national popular vote already. Is there something that they have in common that sets them apart? I know you've got a mix of size of states that have passed.
Yeah. There's a few things they have in common. So first of all, I think maybe what you're pointing to is traditionally they're blue states in presidential elections, right? They've been Democratic states. In terms of the enacting states, those 9 states that I talked about, where we have one chamber or another, that includes the Oklahoma Senate and the Arizona House of Representatives, right, which were very Republican bodies. The other thing they all have in common is they were bipartisan votes to get the national popular vote over the finish line. So, for example, in Oregon, it was Republicans who delivered the votes necessary to get the bill passed, right? New York, we passed the Senate that was Republican controlled 4 times before the Democratic House moved it back when it joined the compact. So, a couple of things in common, traditionally Democratic states, always a bipartisan approach for us, because the truth is we're interested in Republicans and Democrats coming together to make sure that every American voter has an equal voice in presidential elections. And I should say in many states, we work with progressive party members, libertarians. The Conservative Party in the state of New York endorsed the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So, those are a couple of things they have in common.
Well, and you mentioned third parties, and that, of course, is something we have some experience with here in Minnesota. Does this work as well, would you think, in situations where we have multiple candidates for president and the top winner gets a plurality rather than a majority of the popular vote?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the current system only requires a plurality, right? 2. I mean, so Abraham Lincoln was elected president of the United States with the lowest percentage of the vote of any president in the history of America, right? What did he get? 39% of the popular vote at the time. Maybe it was 37. I'm not sure. But I'm sure that it was in that range. So national popular vote clearly states that the candidate with the most popular votes in all 50 states is going to be elected president. Right. So, for example, in a plurality election, Bill Clinton was a plurality president. Right. He got 43% of the vote. He would be guaranteed enough electors in order to be elected president. Same is true with Richard Nixon. Right. So, at the end of the day, it doesn't require a runoff or anything like that. I think third parties will continue to have a voice in presidential elections like they always have. It's not like my party, the Republican Party, is ordained for major party status. I mean, the Whig Party had to come and fail before we could have, room as a major party in American politics. And, I think third party movements have contributed a lot to the body politic and to the discourse, of American politics. And frankly, I would say, I should say 2 of the last 3, and I don't know where Joe Jorgensen is, but 2 of the last 3 Libertarian Party candidates for president have endorsed the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Ralph Nader has been a supporter of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. I don't think it's because they think, oh my God, we got a way better chance to win or lose. They just fundamentally think that if a voter takes the time to vote, their vote should matter as much as anybody else's vote. And I think they come at that. I think they probably share well, I shouldn't say what your values are. They definitely share my values on that, which is why I welcome them into the movement. And I think they share yours, but I'll let you share that.
Well, listen, another question that has come up is concerns something that people are a bit worried about, and that is this independent legislature theory.
Oh, sure.
John Eastman theory around the administration of elections, federal elections, period. Is there a relationship here between what you're trying to do with the compact and the notion that legislatures and legislatures alone should be controlling federal elections?
Well, I think, I don't think it impacts the national popular vote one way or the other. I think it does sort of point to the fact that the Constitution clearly gives the legislature the power to award electors, right? So I don't need I don't need the independent legislature doctrine to read Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, which clearly in a plenary way gives the state the power to join the national popular vote interstate compact. The ILD, the truth is like I think this court and every court will understand that the state and the legislature controls the election, that the federal government controls the schedule and the count, right? Like that's a clear division of federalism and federal elections. And I don't think ILD poses any threat to the national popular vote interstate compact. Now, I think the ECA, which is the Electoral College Act, that we were working with Steve Simon and Amy Klobuchar, who sort of spearheaded that effort to make sure that the ECA dealt with any and all issues that clarified the count in a way that allows the national popular vote interstate compact to operate the way it needs to operate. And so, I think there's some hysteria around ILD, to be honest with you. I think the current court is going to read the Constitution, decide on the basis of the intent of the Constitution around ILD, but it doesn't pose a threat to the national popular vote interstate compact. We can have a national popular vote with or without the ILD.
It doesn't pose a threat, but might it offer a precedent for the independent legislature doctrine?
Well, mostly how it would relate to my issue. And again, I'm not gonna stand here and pretend like I'm an expert on ILD, and I'm not gonna have a dog, either way. I think it's legitimate for people to have a conversation about ILD and what it can mean for the American people. So I want to be real clear about that. To the extent it would ever overlap with national popular vote, it would be around, could the legislature award electors after election day? And compacting state legislatures couldn't do that, because what would govern that would be the impairments clause of the Constitution and the federal law around the count, right? So compacting states, so the interstate compact, one thing it would do would get, if you're a proponent of a national popular vote for president, the compact would give you the power of the impairments clause, which I know a little bit about this court. I've been I've been blessed to work on a lot of important things, including confirming some justices. You know what I mean? I know a little bit about how they think. Bottom line is they're not going to gut the impairments clause. I mean, that is the basis, the foundational basis of contract law in American commerce and democracy. So I actually think the compact would give you, this is an opinion, whatever. We all have legal opinions, and I shouldn't really share them, but that's what I'd say about it. The impairments clause would give you more protection around a national popular vote, because that would supersede that in Article 2, Section 1 and Article 1, Section 10 would have you totally covered on presidential elections, which is another reason to approach it by compact.
Okay. One of the features, as you've been citing, about our federal elections is that they are administered by the states, and there's a fair amount of variation by the states. And I wonder if national popular vote would tend to lead to more homogenized, more similarity among the states with regard to election practices. For example, We in Minnesota are used to voting on paper ballots with the optical scanner machine, which my friend Joan Groh and Joe Mansky would say that's the most accurate way for us to proceed with the potential for recounts always in Minnesota. Would we be compelled to go with an electronic voting system to be like all the other states that don't use paper ballots, for example?
Yeah, the beauty of national popular vote is it preserves that part of the system, right? Which is states continue to control their own elections, right? The only change is there's no real difference, other than one really important one, right? We continue to vote in precincts under Minnesota law. Okay, we're a same-day registration state. The federal government under national popular vote isn't going to change that. And I think, frankly, ideologues on all sides of this issue are concerned of federal control of elections, right? Because it might sound like a good idea when my guy or gal has the gavel, doesn't sound like a really good idea if you're a guy. And you know what I mean? I'm not projecting any politics on you, but right? So one of the beauties of the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, and we know this because in the 15 states in the District of Columbia, or the several times you mentioned that Minnesota has introduced this bill, there's one thing that's never been on it, which is a fiscal note, because it doesn't change anything, right? It doesn't require you to do anything other than follow Minnesota election law, right? And there's one important change. So national popular vote, we still vote in precincts. Precincts report to counties through rapid transmission laws. Counties report to the chief election official of the state, currently Steve Simon. Steve Simon tallies up the votes called the canvass, the popular votes from all of those counties, and he certifies two things on our certificate of ascertainment, right? All of those are public records, by the way, in clear transparency and rapid transmission. So he certifies the canvass, which is the count, and he certifies the slate of election based on the statute. In this instance, it would be the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. That's the change. Then we go back to the current system where he sends those certificates to the electors go to the Capitol in December. They cast their electoral ballots from Minnesota. Those go to Congress, get commingled with everyone else. And, right, then the process proceeds the exact same way it does today. So preserving Minnesota election laws every bit as important to Minnesotans as preserving Oklahoma election laws. Now, if anybody thinks somehow, some way you're protected or compartmentalized with other states, you know what I mean? Like you're not currently impacted by Oklahoma's laws in Minnesota in presidential elections. You don't know enough, right? Because electoral votes go to Congress to get commingled and counted, right? So their electors and their election laws are already offsetting some of our electors, okay? So there's no real protection under the current system from that either, nor should there be. States should control their own elections. They should control the process. They should determine what's in the best interest of their own democracies. And then the counts should proceed the way that the states determine on the federal schedule, because that's their power.
In the event of a very close national popular vote, how would a recount be handled?
Yeah, so a couple of things that I think are important to understand about recounts, okay? First of all, that they'd be far less likely in a national popular vote for president, right? Like we've had before 2020, we had 5 litigated recounts in 57 presidential elections, okay? The reason we had that many recounts in 57, presidential elections is because every year we turn presidential elections into 51 separate elections, right? And really more than that, because you have congressional district elections in 2 states. Didn't require a constitutional amendment to do that, by the way. The state just determined to change their method. But so they're far less likely in a presidential campaign. If you run the math, it's 1 in 185 elections that you might expect to recount, but probably not, just because the pool of votes are so large. Now, if there is a presidential election that is so close that it needs to be recounted, the good news is there's remedy for it, right? So if the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, or when it takes effect and when it starts governing presidential elections, you know how I've been talking about how Congress has control of the schedule and the count? Well, Congress should and I believe will pass a national uniform recount law so that they expedite the count from the states, right? And then if the candidates want to pay for a recount in all 50 states in a close election, they can do that, okay? So the truth is, laws, we don't have to think about national popular vote based on the laws that are in place today. We need to understand that when the national popular vote interstate compact takes effect, Congress can pass a uniform recount law. And if you want to know what law they will pass, you can go to nationalpopularvote.com and look at myths about recount and read the model legislation that will deal with the recount under a national popular vote. Now, opponents sometimes say, recounts, boo.
Mhm.
Okay, well, if you're worried about recounts, you should hate the current system. I mean, really, we're recounting every presidential election and judges are picking presidents based on decisions made in Pennsylvania courts for the entire country. And if you don't believe that, you're not paying attention, right? Arizona courts are deciding who wins the battleground state of Arizona to determine who the next president is, which is leading to visceral divisiveness. And I've been a student of American politics for a really long time. I'm old now. I think when we first met, I hadn't been a student of it for as long as I am today. I am telling you, I have never in my entire life seen a more dangerous political environment in this country with my own eyes. Doesn't mean it's the most dangerous political environment we've ever had. But at the end of the day, nobody trusts the outcome of these elections. And it's tearing at the very fabric of our communities and our country. And that is not what I got into this game for. That is not my civic duty is to do something about that. And, if you want to do something about that, there's a whole bunch of cool little election reforms out there. And I think the work that Clean Elections Minnesota does, thanks for doing this today. I think the work of the League of Women Voters. But if you want to do the one thing that can make the most meaningful impact on the systemic nature of the problems we have in American politics today, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact can do that. Because we'll be thinking about what's in the best interest of every voter in this country. You were talking about social justice. We were talking about this last night, right? I think this is a social justice issue. And so the reason I think that I did a little math, which I'm not very good at, but in Alabama, okay, the flyover state of Alabama, where not a single voter has mattered in a presidential election in my lifetime, because it's a reliably Republican state, right? There are 821,624 Black registered voters, right? Now that's Alabama alone, okay? In the state of Oklahoma, there's 63,000 Latino voters that are absolutely ignored in presidential elections, right? An estimated 63,000. Now, that's important. Make every voter in every state politically relevant in every presidential election. Every one of those people will count. You know what's equally as important, right? Social justice wise, there are 471,157 GOP members in the state of Connecticut. Never once in my lifetime have they mattered in a presidential election, right? So if what we want to do is have a shared consciousness around American politics, we should make every voter in every state politically relevant in every presidential election, and we should get it done. And I hope you'll all help.
Patrick, I appreciate your passion on this issue, and I'm glad you brought up the social justice stuff, because it is the case that if you study the history of the Electoral College, and I know you have, it's clear that it was a system designed to protect white supremacy in the South. It like so many things that we did before the Civil War, before emancipation, this country was stacking some power and making some compromises in a way that protected slave owners. That's not a very good legacy for a system that we continue to use today.
Yeah, Jesse Wegman did a lot of good work on that in a book that he released a couple of years ago. I should say the name of his book, but it's not on the tip of my tongue right now. Jesse Wegman, you can look him up with the New York Times. He did a lot of good stuff on that. And he talked about the convention, right? And he talked about the system of the Electoral College and slavery. And I told Jesse, and I don't know if he quoted me on this in the book. I know I'm in the book a little bit, but I told Jesse, I said, the Electoral College, yes, it was part of that compromise to get out of the convention, right? But it wasn't a nod to the small states. You know what I mean? It was like, so the big states would go for it, like Virginia, right? And what most people don't know is this state-based winner-take-all system. You know, the founders didn't leave the convention saying this is how we're going to elect the president. They left with the 17 words that says each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors. How we got to this current state-based winner-take-all system is in the first election after George Washington, John Adams beat Thomas Jefferson, right, by 3 electors. Adams cherry-picked electors out of what should have been Southern states for Jefferson. Well, Jefferson, you know, tweets Monroe or whatever they do at that time and says, we have the power to change this system. He moves Virginia to the state-based winner-take-all law because he says, we're going to make Virginia the state of presidents. It was the largest state at the time. And then when they did it, New York responds in kind. So what happens in the lead up to the Civil War is the North and the South start adopting these state-based winner-take-all laws that are nowhere in the United States Constitution. And they do it to consolidate the political power of the majority party of their state so that the South and North would have reliable slates of electors. So the entire system was predicated on sort of preserving the power of slave owners in the South.
Yeah. You spoke moments ago eloquently about the reform power, the power to change our system for the better that you see in the National Popular Vote Compact. There's another reform movement that's been active in Minnesota even longer than you have been working on this, ranked choice voting. And there are those who think that Minnesota is on the verge of going to a statewide ranked choice voting system as we now have in Maine and in Alaska. I would like to see that happen, frankly, but I'm not sure it will. If it would, though, is ranked choice voting in any way compatible with what you're talking about here?
Oh, 100% compatible. As a matter of fact, I think most of these questions are driven by talking points of, I'm not saying that the question you're getting, it's a legitimate question, but I hear this question from Save Our States, who actually is, you know, the motive, their stop NPV and their stop RCV. And they try to drive a wedge through the reform movement. You know, they say things like our plan was conceived before ranked choice voting was an idea. That's simply not true. I mean, Rob Ritchie with Fair Vote, you know, he's the author of the book for National Popular Vote, right? They're 2 separate issues. And Rob Ritchie and Fair Vote were the first organization to endorse the National Popular Vote bill. So this came up in Maine, right? So we work with the proponents of ranked choice voting because they want their system to work with any system we use to elect the president, right? They want it to work in the current system. They want it to work with a congressional district system. They certainly want it to work with a national popular vote system because we share a lot of supporters. So I'm just going to read you the Secretary of State in Maine, the only state that has a ranked choice voting bill for president, right? When that bill passed, we worked with the Secretary of State in Maine, who happens to support both of us, which most do. And she inserts language in an amendment that says the certificate shall state the number of votes each candidate for president receives statewide for each congressional district in the final round tabulation under section 72(3)(a). Okay, so the Secretary of State at Maine works with National Popular Vote to make sure that the Maine statute operates the way it's intended with National Popular Vote. Secretary of State in Minnesota, should ranked choice voting pass in Minnesota for presidential elections, will work to make sure that the language works with the National Popular Vote for president. So the truth is the real question is about the final determination, right? The ranked choice voting bill has to be very clear that they're going to report out the final result for presidential elections, and then ranked choice voting is completely compatible with the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. I had somebody ask me this question by email yesterday, and I'm like, look, a couple of things that you sort of need to understand, because you know he offered it up as like a friendly amendment to the National Popular Vote bill, and I didn't write back, but I just want to say that is not there's no such thing as a friendly amendment to the National Popular Vote bill. The National Popular Vote bill has passed 15 states and the District of Columbia. Interstate compacts have to pass in similar form and substance. Anybody who offers a change of an idea that a National Popular Vote Interstate Compact is saying, I don't want a National Popular Vote for president. Because
And
if
then-
you change it, you have to go back and change it everywhere you did it. So we've worked with the proponents of ranked choice voting in Minnesota and will continue to do so. We have great relationships there to make sure that the language is appropriate for ranked choice voting to work in a national popular vote system, and that ranked choice voting operates the way it intends for voters to rank their choices and report out the final tabulation.
And Patrick, we're close to being out of time here, but someone has asked, does Congress also have to approve an interstate compact?
I think that's the one piece of, I said there's going to be lawsuits, right? There'll always be lawsuits. So if you read Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution, and if I was a justice, I'd say, yeah, you're going to go to Congress and get consent, right? Because it says no state shall enter into an interstate compact without the consent of Congress, okay? Now, current case law says the only interstate compacts that require congressional consent are compacts that encroach on what's called federal supremacy. Okay, that was the Rehnquist court trying to put teeth into the 10th Amendment, basically. So there's no federal power, let alone federal supremacy here, right? Article 2, Section 1 is a plenary power of the state. Now, the one thing I need people to understand is what happens is interstate compacts reach their triggering threshold, right? We get 270 electoral votes. Courts will determine whether or not congressional consent is required. Okay, that's a part of the process. If the court says congressional consent is required for the national popular vote interstate compact, we go and get consent when we've reached the threshold of 270 electoral votes, which is a majority of the member of Congress, right? Plus there's other supporters in other states. So at the end of the day, if we need consent, we'll go get it, but that's a part of the process. It doesn't make the compact flawed because it doesn't have it.
We're just about out of time, and there are a number of questions here, more information about what's happening this year at the Minnesota legislature. Do you have bills introduced?
Bills will be introduced shortly. The bills are being introduced in lots of states, but Minnesota.
Who are your sponsors, chief sponsors of these bills in Minnesota, or don't you know?
Well, here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to get ahead of them. I don't want to break any news tonight. I don't speak for legislators. That is not a good idea as a proponent and advocate of the national popular vote bill. But they'll be introduced with sponsors, and sponsors will join the bill along the way. We're focused on meeting with every legislator in the state of Minnesota that will take a meeting and walking them through the dangers of the current system, why Minnesota voters want a national popular vote for president. We're working with coalition partners. We'd love you guys to, kind of weigh in on our behalf if you think this is a good idea. And what I'll tell you is we got a lobby team over at the Capitol. I'm senior consultant. I live here. I promise you, we got lots of shoulders to this wheel, but we need every shoulder to this wheel, and we will get it done. So when the bill drops, you don't even have to wait for the bill to drop. If you go to nationalpopularvote.com, you know what I mean, and you hit that right legislator function, that's the most powerful thing you can do for the national popular vote interstate compact. And it's the best thing you can do to get this thing done, because they need to hear from you. We need to get this done.
All right. That does take us right up to the 8 o'clock hour here. Thank you, Patrick, for just a very informative.
No way. Thank you.
Tonight. I'm sure that we've all learned a lot about National Popular Vote Compact and its potential here tonight.
Well, thank you. It's fun to hang out. And, the most important thing you learn is if you want a national popular vote for president, get involved, get engaged, help us out.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for paying attention to our conversation, and we'll be in touch. Good night.